Hello everyone, my name is Sahas Barve and I'm the Program Director of Avian Ecology at Archbold Biological Station. Today we are going to talk about physiology, avian physiology, which largely deals with the question of how birds stay alive. So, birds are endotherms, and endotherms means that they are a type of animal that maintains their internal body temperature all the time, but they are also all organisms in general are trying to maintain what is called homeostasis. So with endotherms, it means that they are trying to maintain a constant internal body temperature, but on top of that, they also have to maintain water balance. They have to maintain enough oxygen levels in their tissues. They have to maintain uh, like being full with food, or so in a sense it is a constant balance. Homeostasis is the constant balance of making sure that you are not too warm, not too cold, not overhydrated, not dehydrated, not too full, not too hungry. And these sort of essential life things are affected by a whole range of other problems that the animal has to face, like competition from other conspecifics even competition from other species. They have to deal with other things like habitat quality, dying, and age. And so physiology deals with how to sort of maintain a constant inside while having a tremendously variable outside. So, how do animals maintain their physiological homeostasis while the temperature outside might be changing constantly, or it might be getting drier or more humid, or there might be less food available or more food available? Okay, so to understand that, let's pick some of these things like temperature and water balance and oxygen availability and food availability one by one. Okay, so how do birds keep warm? Like I said, birds are endotherms. That means they try to maintain a constant body temperature. And there are three big ways in which birds keep warm, which is they have an insulating layer of feathers. And so we learned in our feathers lecture that birds have these really cool feathers that they use as a insulating barrier against the outside cold air. So they trap a pocket of air which they heat up and keep warm. Then when this insulating layer of feathers is not enough, they can produce body heat, right? So just like you and I, birds also shiver to produce body heat, and this body heat, this constant body heat that they're maintaining inside of the body, is very easily seen on a thermal camera. So here's a nice photo of a hummingbird sitting on a nest, and hummingbirds are tiny birds that are really warm. They maintain their body temperatures at really high temperatures, even above temperatures that we maintain our body. And so you can see this likely female hummingbird sitting on her nest very easily because she's glowing with heat in a relatively cold habitat. But the third thing they can do to keep warm is just fly somewhere else, right? Fly to a warmer place. That could mean down the hill, down elevation, or across latitudes. So a lot of animals do that as well. And here I'm showing you the photo of the picture of an Indian pitta, because Indian pittas do that. So Indian pittas breed in central India and all along the foothills of the Himalayas. But in the winters, because it gets really cold in those regions, they fly down to the Western Ghats and to Sri Lanka to winter because it's much warmer there. So to keep warm, birds use a range of different strategies and to maintain that homeostasis, right? So they maintain to be in a place where their feathers keep them warm enough, that they have enough food. But for that, Pitta specifically have to do a costly behavior of flying back and forth across India every year. Okay, so let's deep dive down into what it means to stay warm. So here is a very sort of fundamental diagram for how vertebrates or many animals for that matter keep warm, and we are going to walk through this diagram very carefully. And the first thing that we are going to look at is RMR. And so here in this diagram, the y-axis is the rate of heat production, and the x-axis is air temperature outside. So Ta means temperature, ambient temperature, okay, the temperature outside the body. RMR stands for resting metabolic rate. So the resting metabolic rate, or the rate at which heat is produced or oxygen is consumed, is a certain rate for, and this may change for every animal. But there, that resting metabolic rate is only true for what is called the TNZ, or the thermoneutral zone. And so TNZ or TNZ is the temperature at which the animal is sort of most comfortable. It has to maintain, it can maintain its body temperature very easily, without using a lot of energy, without producing a lot of heat itself. So that's the TNZ or TNZ, the thermoneutral zone. Below the thermoneutral zone is a temperature that is called the lower critical temperature of the body, beyond which the animal has to start expending more energy and producing more heat to stay warm. So this is the lower critical temperature, where animals start shivering, or they start doing other things where they are using more energy than at rest, to maintain their body temperature. And then there is the upper critical limit, or TUC, where it is too hot, and so animals will start doing actions or doing behaviors like panting, or like spreading their wings, or many other things like perspiring, like sweating. Of course, birds don't sweat, but this is true for all animals. So there's upper critical temperature above which animals are again using energy to maintain that body temperature. So how do you measure that energy used to keep warm and to maintain body temperature? And that is what is called the metabolic rate, or very simply put, the rate at which oxygen is consumed by the animal. And this metabolic rate is in two ways. So there's mass specific metabolic rate and basal metabolic rate. And so the basal metabolic rate is the raw amount of oxygen that an animal breathes in to maintain its constant homeostatic state. This mass specific metabolic rate is how much oxygen the animal is consuming per gram of its own body weight per minute. And that is the mass specific metabolic rate is a very strong inverse relationship with body size. And so we are going to get into the importance of body size for physiology in a second here. But this is the first big pattern that I want you to remember, that small animals are consuming more oxygen to stay warm than large animals. And we'll get to the reason why in a second. So if you plot all birds, hummingbirds consume more oxygen per unit mass, unit body mass, per gram of body mass than an ostrich. Okay, this is true. So this is true from hummingbirds to ostriches. So almost across all birds, they fit on this curve based on their body size. But why is that? And one of the reasons for that is that small birds have a big surface to volume ratio. So they have a small core and a big exposed area for that small core. And so they lose heat very quickly, which means that they have to consume more oxygen to produce body heat more for longer. And so small birds, remember, find it hard to keep warm in a cold place. Again, because they have a large surface to volume ratio, small birds find it hard to keep warm in a cold place. But large birds have the opposite problem. They find it hard to stay cool in a warm place. And so large birds might have many adaptations like open bare skin patches, like this ostrich, right? Ostriches find it very hard to lose heat very quickly, but they have naked necks and big, long, naked legs through which they can lose heat quickly. The third thing that animals can do, including birds, is go into torpor. And I am not going to go too much into detail because Dr. Anusha Shankar, who's a fantastic physiologist, is going to give you a guest lecture about this. But some animals can basically lower their body temperature so that they use less energy to stay warm. Okay, so this is a great series of photos from one of Anusha's papers where you can see this hummingbird going into what is called torpor, where it's literally cooling down. It's reducing its own body temperature, letting it cool down to an extent where it is barely visible on this heat sensing camera. So here's a graph of what happens with the metabolic rate. Again, metabolic rate is measured as the amount of oxygen that is consumed, right? So the at the start of torpor, metabolic rate is somewhere here. Then it quickly drops to where the bird is so cold that it is barely breathing and barely consuming any oxygen. But these birds have the amazing ability to come out of torpor by using their physiology and going back to having that resting metabolic rate. Okay, so the problem with small bodies giving out a lot of heat is so large that there is a biogeographic rule for body size, right? So you can predict for a given species, or even in some taxa across species, what the size of the animal will be depending on where it is found in the world. So that's called Bergmann's rule, and Bergmann's rule says that animals are typically smaller at the tropics than at the poles. So animals are big at the poles, small at the tropics, and some people give it examples of stuff like sun bears, which are small at the tropics, and polar bears and grizzly bears, which are large at the poles. But here's a great example of a single species. This is a single species of a New World sparrow called a song sparrow, so very similar to buntings in Asia. Here's a southern population of song sparrows, and here's a northern population of song sparrows. And look at the tremendous difference in body size within the same species. So the same species is this large at the northern end of its range, probably because it then hence loses less or needs less energy to survive in the cold weather, because it loses less heat because of the larger body size. So now let's come to maintaining water balance, right? So the we are animals have to maintain a certain amount of hydration, which means that you can be overhydrated where there is too much water in your body, or dehydrated when there is too less, very little water in your body, and both those things affect how your muscles function, how your cognition functions. If you have ever been dehydrated, you start getting really angry and irritated, or you feel really tired, right? So maintaining water balance is extremely important. And water balance is we are constantly losing water through evapotranspiration through our skin, and birds lose water as well. And how birds lose water is very similar to how birds lose heat, because we both lose water and heat through the skin. And so the amount of water that is required by a bird is again driven by body size. So small birds like hummingbirds and wrens, need a lot more water to maintain their water balance than a large bird like an ostrich. So remember, water balance and temperature are very similar in how they are maintained across the body size range of all birds. So, what happens to birds that live in deserts or live with very, very, very little fresh water? And here I'm going to give you two examples of these amazing birds, fascinating birds. That one of them, all actually, a bunch of them live in India. So here's an example of a greater hoopoo lark, which you can see in northwest India, in the deserts of India. And greater hoopoo larks live in the center of the desert where there is very little water in the summer, and they live in extremely hot environments. So greater hoopoo larks have like run around on ground that can be up to 70 degrees Celsius, and they build nests where their chicks are in direct contact with this really hot ground, and they have the ability to survive these amazingly high temperatures. And they may have some. I can quickly show you some adaptations that they may have to lose that excess heat. So there you can see that the greater hoopoo lark has long tarsi, this tarsus bone, which is really long, which keeps its body away from the hot ground. It also has this really long beak that helps it lose heat very quickly. And so in our anatomy lecture, um, we learned that uh, birds use their beaks as a radiator to lose body heat. And so I'm sure the hoopoe uses that to lose body heat. Um, and so they hoopoe larks probably gain all the moisture they need from the food they eat, and they live largely without drinking water while sustaining these really high temperatures. Another place where there is no fresh water is, of course, the open ocean. And there's a lot of birds that live on the open ocean and never see land for years, sometimes even 2 or 3 years at a time. So, how do they survive? How do they satisfy the demands of fresh water? And that they do that by, of course, drinking seawater. And they drink seawater, but they have the ability to metabolize that salt and excrete the extra salt through what are called salt glands. The most pronounced salt glands are seen in this group of birds called tube-nosed birds. And tube-nosed birds are your petrels, storm petrels, shearwaters, albatrosses. These are all birds that have these very, very obvious tube shaped nostril with a salt gland attached to it. And seabirds can drink large amounts of seawater, something that would literally kill us, but they can drink the seawater and then excrete the extra salt out, and survive out on the open ocean for years. Okay, the third thing is getting enough oxygen, right? So we are all birds breathe oxygen just like us, and they also have the problem of making sure that they have enough oxygen, especially because flying is an extremely energy intensive activity. And so for all flying birds, they have to have extremely good respiration physiology to keep their muscles oxygenated so they can do the extremely fast movements that are required for flying. And birds have this amazing respiratory system that we'll also learn in the anatomy class, anatomy lecture, where they have a series of air sacs where that move air between the lungs and the air sacs and the mouth, obviously, and in a way that these lungs, that the bird lungs don't expand and contract like our lungs, but they basically get new, more fresh air while the bird is inhaling and exhaling. And so they have this extremely efficient way of inhaling and exhaling, and oxygenating their body tissues, making sure that their body tissues are fully oxygenated. But birds have found many other ways. So there's birds that live and or fly through extremely hypoxic areas, right? So there's birds that live at high elevations all year round, and those high elevation sites have low oxygen content in the air. So they have low, what is called low partial pressure of oxygen. So how do birds fly in a habitat that has very little, or in an environment that has very little oxygen? And the answer is that there are many different ways in which birds have adapted to being in a hypoxic environment. And within the bar-headed goose alone, within one species alone, scientists have found many different ways in which bar-headed geese increase the amount of oxygen that they are breathing in. So let's go at a cellular level. They have their blood is just more it has higher affinity to oxygen binding, and so their oxygen binds more readily with their blood than our blood. They have large hearts. They have highly capillarized muscle fibers, which means that the blood that is oxygenated gets to their lungs really quickly. They actually have larger lungs for their body size than any other bird. They also have high ventilation rates, so that they are breathing in a way that produces a really efficient way of making sure oxygen is delivered. So they within one animal, there are many different adaptations that helps it combat hypoxia. But there are some things that are common across all birds. And so here again, I'm going to give you an example of some research that I myself did during my PhD. And it uncovered a pattern that is conserved across many, many species. And this is likely true for humans as well. And so what we found by studying the hemoglobin concentration, and again, remember, hemoglobin is the molecule that binds oxygen and oxygenates the blood. So having high hemoglobin concentration means you can absorb more oxygen to a certain extent from the air. And so what we showed for the first time in wild birds was that irrespective of what type of bird they are, whether they are an elevation migrant or high elevation resident, birds at high elevations have more hemoglobin in their blood than birds at low elevations. And so, across many, many taxa, and this is probably true for all birds in the world, birds at high elevations have more hemoglobin concentration than birds at low elevation. The other thing birds do is very similar to humans again. So just like you and I, when we go up to high elevation, we meaning lowlanders, animals that live at low elevations or populations that live at low elevations go to high elevations, we increase the number of red blood cells in our blood, increasing what is called the hematocrit of the blood. And so what we found in that research was that elevational migrants that go between oxygen rich environments in for about 8 months of the year and oxygen poor environments for about 4 months of the year regularly increase the number of red blood cells in their blood when they are at high elevations, while high elevation residents, very similar to actually a lot of animals that live at high elevations, and certain populations of humans that live at high elevations as well, do not have to increase their red blood cell count to increase the amount of oxygen in their blood, amount of oxygenation in their blood, and even at sometimes the amount of hemoglobin in their blood. So they have these adaptations by after living at high elevations for a long, long time. They have gotten these adaptations where they don't have to increase the red blood cell count in their blood. So again, this is again to show that physiology is very, very complicated in the sense that one challenge, which is how to get oxygen from the environment, may have many different ways in which the bird overcomes that challenge. So again, let's talk about those trade-offs. This physiology and ecology and evolution is all about trade-offs, right? So everything, every challenge is met with multiple different sort of answers. We saw that some birds can survive cold winters by not going into torpor, being large animals with really good feathers, while other birds go into torpor and reduce their body temperature to survive cold nights. Some birds have really, really good water balance. They can survive in even after drinking salt water. Some birds might return or might make long flights to actually drink fresh water every few days to maintain their water balance. Some birds some birds might be really well adapted to hypoxia, while other birds go up and down every year, moving between oxygen rich and oxygen poor environments when it gets cold. And so again, this hypoxia and temperature are also very closely related to each other, because temperature, to maintain your body temperature by producing body heat, requires that you use shivering of your muscles to stay warm, and shivering muscles need a lot of oxygen. So birds might find it extremely hard to live at a cold and hypoxic place like the high Himalayan mountains, or the high mountains anywhere in the world rather, than surviving cold at in a low oxygen rich environment. And so not only are these things like temperature, water balance, hypoxia major challenges that keep a bird continuously challenges a bird into doing things to maintain its homeostasis or to maintain a steady internal rate, but they also interact with each other so that certain places become more difficult for a bird to survive than other places. So because birds are so well adapted to their in their environments, and have all these trade-offs of where they live, how much they eat, how they maintain their water balance, how much they maintain their temperature. They also have the ability to change their internal physiology to a great extent. And in the anatomy class, we talked about how some birds have the ability to actually absorb or make their intestines smaller, so they require less food to survive. Another thing that birds do on a annual basis is they change the amount of sort of contribution their body makes to their gonads or reproductive organs. So here's graphs from the textbook, the Handbook of Bird Biology, where they show testes size, which is the size of the male reproductive cells, reproductive organs, and you can see that the reproductive organs start increasing in size in the breeding season only. And so outside the breeding season, birds are both males and females. So here's females. Both males and females have very low levels of sex hormones that are circulating in their blood, and their reproductive organs are also very small. But as the temperature starts warming up after the winter, birds use that cue, and the lengthening of days, birds use that cue to start investing more energy in growing those reproductive cells, reproductive organs, so that they can reproduce. And then after reproduction, they start shrinking again. So reproductive physiology is also caught up in this whole thing of how to maintain that internal homeostasis most effectively and efficiently. So, how do birds deal with all this constant, what are called stressors, right? And there's a whole field that I'm not an expert in and I'm not going to go into, but it's called stress physiology. And birds, like you and I, birds also get stressed, and birds also get stressed when it is really cold. Birds get stressed when it is really dangerous. It sounds really stormy and windy. Birds get stressed when there is a lot of noise. Bird gets stressed when they can't sleep properly. And birds also have a hormone in their body, corticosterone, which is very similar to our stress hormone. And so this is a great example of tree swallows, another North American bird. And you can see the amount of stress hormone in the blood in stormy weather is significantly higher than when the weather is good. And this type of graph is replicated with the stress hormone in many other situations increasingly, although we don't have really great evidence, but there is some evidence to suggest that stuff like air pollution and noise pollution may increase stress levels in birds as well. And so birds often use this hormone to start as an indicator of that they need to adjust by doing something else. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture today. The biggest thing I want you to take away from the lecture is that bird physiology is all about maintaining a constant inside, while the outside is constantly changing, very variable outside. And the bird, while maintaining what we call homeostasis, is constantly fine balancing or fine tuning how it is responding to temperature changes, changes in water, changes in humidity, changes in food availability, and while at the same time also grappling with other stressors like competition from other birds, increasing or decreasing habitat quality, and increasing and decreasing age. So physiology is like riding, or homeostasis is like riding a unicycle while juggling many balls at the same time, something like that. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed this whole series about bird anatomy, physiology, and feathers. Thank you so much.